Well, we're starting to get a nice group of folks here. Our ranks are a bit thinned. All right, since it's 10 o'clock and we got a lot of people here, we might as well get rolling. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. We've had another resignation. We'll talk about all that later. But in the meantime, I'd like to catch up with everybody. I'll start real quick. For the last 2 weeks, I've had a friend visiting. This is a young man from the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras who was visiting family in Ohio 3 months ago, intended to stay a week, and his island was quarantined, and he's been stuck in Ohio for 3 months. An avid fisherman and outdoors kind of guy. I had him come out and visit me. And we spent the last 2 weeks fishing, hiking, morel hunting, swimming, camping. And it makes you realize how lucky we are to live in Oregon. I've had a wonderful experience with him. We're heading to the coast tomorrow. So we're really lucky to be here, and he's completely impressed with the wildlife and the fish and everything that he's seen. And it makes me proud to be able to be working on the things we're working on. So that's what I've been doing. Moret, what's up with you? Are you there, Moret?
She's on mute. There you go.
Hello. Is my sound bad? How's my sound today? I'm getting pretty crackly.
Yeah,
not so good. Can you call me later? I'll try another connection.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you might try again. We're getting about every other word.
Yeah, how is it now?
That's better. That's a little better. You want to try it?
I'm sorry, why don't you call somebody else, and I'll try another connection. Thanks.
Brad, it's still a little bit staticky.
Yeah, she's going to try something else, so we'll come back to Moret.
All right. Well then, hey Jane, how are you?
Oh, hold on a little bit.
I'm doing good. I decided to try and do this outside today. We'll see how that works. It's such a pretty day. I just couldn't stand being in a room all day. So We'll see if it works. So far, so good. There's a Bullock's Oriole carrying on in the back that you might hear, and lots of other birds out here. So going well.
Okay, well, that's a check-in from Jane. How about Chris?
Hey, everybody. Chris is doing great. Had a solid weekend. Been enjoying just the nice weather. And the Razor Clam opener. So we got a couple limits of razor clams yesterday, and just been trying to get outside as much as we can.
Well, Chris, I tell you, man, every time you talk, I got to ask you for a map, man. You're always doing something I want to go do.
Try and stay active. You let me know if you're gonna go anywhere. I'll let you know where I'm going.
Mark Labhart, how are you doing?
Good morning, everybody. Doing good. So maybe you can find out where Chris went razor clam digging and take your friend over there, Carl. Find out a good spot for it. Yesterday, I got the opportunity. I like to float tube fish, and so my neighbor and I went up to Three Creeks Lake, which is a beautiful lake just south of Sisters, and spent the day fishing there. And I think ODF and W stocked the lake because Usually we catch 14 to 16-inch brook trout there, and I swear about every 5 minutes we had a rainbow trout on. It was only about 10 to 12 inches, so they were all the same size, and so they must have been planted there. But we had a good day of catching and releasing fish. Didn't need to take any home, but it was a fun day fishing. So on the good news side, I don't know if many of you probably heard that the Energy 202 conservation bill looks like it's going to pass, and that's going to reauthorize $900 million back into the Land, Water, and Conservation Fund. And so that's a cash-strapped program. $900 million, that's going to be a huge effort for conservation. And so we need to kind of watch that pretty close about potentially using that as for some match for programs that we'd like to see funded. So I think that's going to pass. Chris probably knows better than I do, but from what I understand, it went out of the Senate, was on over to the House, and I don't know if it passed the House or not, but they were anticipating that it would. So it's a $9.5 billion program that does maintenance on national parks, national forests, wildlife refuges, and then they got $900 million of that dedicated to the Land, Water, and Conservation Fund. So that's some pretty good news there.
Man, that is good news. I knew that was out there. I didn't know it was getting close. That's wonderful. Mark, has there been any movement on the Restoring America's Wildlife Act, or is that going to be later?
Not as far as I know, but maybe some others know about that. That's a little bit of a worry for me personally, because now that the Senate passed this, they're calling it, let me get the title of it here. They're calling it the largest conservation bill for in the history of the state, or Congress. It's called the Great American Outdoors Act. So I'm hoping that isn't going to be, well, we funded that, so we don't need to fund the Renewable for America's Wildlife Act. So I'm a little bit worrier about that. So hopefully this is an and. We fund the Great American Outdoors Act, and we also fund the renewable. So Davia may know more about it than I do, but that's I'm worried just a little bit.
All right. Hey, Mark Stern, how you doing?
You're on mute still, Mark. There you go.
Yeah, doing good. Good morning. Nice to see everybody out there. Let's see, the past couple of weeks, we spent a little bit of time hiking in the Central Oregon area. Had a great hike on the Lower Metolius down towards that stretch of that trail that goes from the lower bridge all the way down towards Lake Billy Chinook in that part of the world. So that was a nice place to be. Hardly anybody out there, and taking in spring and early summer. So that's been good. And I guess I would second Mark Laphart's observation that the Senate passing the Great American Outdoor Act, something like 73 to 25, was just really phenomenal in terms of moving that kind of legislation forward in this environment. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's really a positive thing. Sherilyn.
Hi, everyone. Let's see, what are my updates? My youngest child is turning 18 tomorrow, so I can no longer really officially say I have children, although we all know 18-year-olds are still children in many ways. And looking forward to going up and visiting some family on Friday at the lake. It'll be our sort of first trip out of town in the last couple of months while all this has been going on. So it's just a day trip, but kind of exciting.
Yeah, there's a pattern here, man. Everybody wants to be outside. That's a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm happy to hear that people are doing that. Kaylin, are you with us today?
Sure am. Yeah. Good morning. Yeah, similar theme. Spent the beautiful longest couple days of the year outside. We were over in the Mackenzie River country. That was really fun, along with a lot of other folks. On the work front, I too am excited to see the Great American Outdoors Act clear the Senate, but have a slightly different opinion. We might see, kind of as Commissioner Labhart was saying, a yes and, where Congress gets a pat on the back theoretically, for doing something that's so broadly supported. So I'm hopeful that it might compel additional action, whether that's Recovering America's Wildlife Act or talk of a 21st century civilian conservation corps, which are national things that I'm keeping track of a little bit. On the work side, today, in between our morning and afternoon sessions, I will be formally submitting the governor's task force on the outdoors report to Governor Brown. So a body of work that Chris and many others contributed to over the course of the last year is getting handed in. And that'll go out with a press release and hopefully get some attention this week with next steps to follow. But I think it's really relevant to our work here. So I look forward to discussing with this group some of the recommendations there at a future meeting, but I'll make sure everyone gets a final copy of that report as well. And then I previewed a little bit on our last call that something that was sort of getting me down was knowing that the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department's in a really tough budget position based on, frankly, hits to both lottery revenue and user fee revenue. So a couple weeks ago, we formally froze all seasonal hiring. We had already stopped projects, and 50-ish, 47 full-time staff received layoff notices that are effective at the end of this month. I was one of those people. And for about 10 days there, I was trying to figure out how to wrap up this work. And that's not really possible as a single entity office required in statute. And huge kudos and appreciation goes to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon State Marine Board, who contributed funding to carry on the work of the Office of Outdoor Recreation through the end of this calendar year. That still leaves about a 6-month gap in the fiscal, so January to June next year, that we're still trying to figure out how to support this work going forward. But just an incredible outpouring of support from other agencies, stakeholders, et cetera, saying, you know, we know the budget environment is really tough right now, but we can't lose the traction that we have on the big picture, kind of forward-looking outdoor recreation work that the office was created to lead. So it's been an up and down couple weeks, and being outside has been the salve that's gotten me through it. So yeah, that's my update.
Great. Kalen, man, I'm so happy to hear that you're going to be with us and that you're on board, and that's a big deal. And as far as you said, you had some things you're going to do today. I'm really looking to you to help us in our conversation, particularly relevant to some of the recreation piece, you know, the recreation projects. Are you going to be able to participate with us in that?
I will. Yeah, I just wanted to mention the task force report in particular, because it's something we discussed and earlier versions have been shared with this group. And Carl, you and I have talked about it. But yeah, I'll be here for the brainstorm. I have some recreation projects, and the priorities may have shifted a little bit in terms of OPRD needs, because some of the other areas that were identified for reduction include our stewardship program. So a huge portion of the stewardship, Wild and Scenic River staff, really anything outside of core state park operations was part of those budget cuts. And so there might be some more immediate OPRD stewardship related projects that we could think about as well that might be relevant for the committee's consideration.
Well, Kayla, that's great. I appreciate. I'm again really happy that things went the way they did for you, and that I'm looking forward to having discussion. Hey, Mauricio.
Good morning, everybody. What's going on with me? So, yeah, likewise, I've been exploring with my little ones. We went hiking this morning. I inflated the pool in the backyard, and having a great time over there. And it just, you know, making me think about what a time to be a parent. You know, so many things are happening, and so many things that we try to make sense ourselves, and how do we explain some of those to our kids, and how important it is the work that we do to you know, keep the promise of you know, nature and all the inherent benefits of being exposed to nature and finding a sense of belonging in nature. And so it's been reaffirming. It's been also a good reminder of the responsibility that we have here, and to the next generation to make sure that we make the best decisions possible on their behalf.
Thanks, Mauricio. Hey, Davia, I think you're last.
Well, and we have Marette back too. So
Okay.
her too. But morning, everybody. Good to see you all. I was thinking about this morning. I've been on video calls since 8 this morning, and I watched the garbage truck come by at like 9:30, and I said, "Oh, the recycling truck will be here in 12 minutes." I thought I'm becoming a in my house naturalist with all the things that happen on a Monday morning. Realizing that, you know, it's been 3 months of Monday mornings sitting in this room working from home. So it was a fun observation, and weird to think about how the time passes differently when days are so similar from day to day. But I've been grateful we've been able to keep work moving and make progress on all sorts of fronts that we've been working on. So I'm excited to make progress today and keep moving forward. Thanks to y'all for being here.
Thanks, Davia. Marette, have you got a little better connection, you think?
We'll give it a go. How do I sound now?
A lot better.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, I've also been out, same place that Mark went, Three Creeks Lake. It's a beautiful spot, 6,000 feet, and the back meadows there are just completely full of shooting stars. Like I've never seen millions and millions of shooting star flowers. So that's been renewing and helped my mood. And I have to say, I was just sad to see Suzanne resign. And it sort of triggers me because working for a government agency like the Forest Service, like as I did in the beginning, a lot of people would sort of write off the whole agency. And when I tried to talk to them, they're like, well, you're part of this agency, and so you can't be an honest or a good person. And it took a long time to change those things. And I think giant agencies are kind of like the Titanic. They're hard to turn. And the change and the turning comes from the ground up. It starts from the people that are working, people like Davia, who have such a different background, and partners that choose to risk to do something with an agency, and from leaders that choose to risk partnership and collaboration. Because a Force Soup once told me that collaboration and partnership is not a natural go-to position for most leaders because it involves loss of control. And they like to control things. So and the reason they do it, even though they're not comfortable with it, is because they see the long-term benefits. And we all understand that we need to go forward together. None of our agencies are going to make it without a lot of support. So I was sad to see her go and to sort of write off the whole process. I think there's a lot of benefits here, and there's a lot of good to be shown. So anyway, just trying to keep enjoying the summer and keep the ball rolling. Thank you.
Brett, thank you so much for bringing that up, bringing up Suzanne's resignation, because we're going to talk a little bit about that now. You nailed it for me in what you said, Marette, so thanks for that. As you all know, we had Laura Anderson resign because of the COVID outbreak and the issues she had with her business, and we have been making some efforts to find a replacement for her. But of course, all that happens at the governor's office level. We've been reaching out to some folks from the coast, particularly some tribal members that we have communicated with that have expressed an interest. But that process is going to be some time. So we're in the process to replace Laura, but even with the time we've had, I think we still got a while before that happens. The governor's office has got a lot of other things on their plate. I was also quite disappointed in Suzanne's decision. She of course, is very passionate about the issues, and the beaver issue is very important to her. I'm completely in agreement with the importance of beavers in the watershed, and particularly in the face of climate change, and I appreciate her passion for that. I'm I think it's quite a disappointment that she's not working with us, because as Marat so eloquently said, this is how we make those changes right here in this group. And she could have been, I think, a powerful force in that way. So with that, does anybody have any comments regarding Suzanne's retirement they'd like to make, or resignation? Anybody want to raise their hand about that?
Mauricio?
Yeah, likewise. I think that Suzanne brought a great deal of. She was very observant. She's very detail oriented. She was very insightful, and I think we need to keep in mind how important it is to have someone who's constantly asking questions, making sure that we are covering everything that we should be covering, and representing everything and everyone that we should be representing. When I led this for previous meetings with Carl and Davia, I asked Davia, and I came to an understanding of how some of these things work in terms of how science can inform decisions and policy, but ultimately policy and all those decisions that take place at organizational level are a representation of values of the group. So I think that makes our work even more important in how to. I was actually encouraged to hear that even though her concerns were not addressed in this particular meeting, afterwards ODFW it sparks sort of like an additional inquiry on what is the impact of beaver trapping, which means that we are trying to be diligent. There are people who are wanting to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard, and that we're trying to do our best to inform decisions. But it ultimately comes down to values: the people that enforce them, the people that pass them, and the people that it affects, and their emotional connections to the issues. And so I think that I'd like for us to continue to think of how Suzanne was very diligent about everything that we're looking at. And unfortunately, I don't have the scientific background or professional expertise that she had. And I'm hoping that with the remaining group here, we can try to fill that void as best as we can. And just to continue to ask questions, because that's how things work, and to make sure that everyone gets a chance to understand why we make the decisions that we make. So sad to see her go, but we have to honor what she brought to this group.
Thanks, Mauricio. Mauricio used that term at our meeting earlier last week to honor her by just continuing our work. And I'm glad he said it again, because that resonated with me when he said it. Mark, Mark Labhart, you have a comment?
Yeah, I too was disappointed and sad to see her go. As we all know, the world is run by those who show up and those who participated. And sometimes things don't go your way, but it doesn't mean that you give up. And so I think Suzanne had a strong voice, and I wish she would have stayed. We all know in our careers that we've had some disappointment sometimes, but we stay engaged and we stay to work at the issues. And so I was disappointed that she decided that she wanted to disengage. So I think it's going to be a loss for this committee. I think it's going to be a loss for her passion. So, but hopefully she'll continue to participate at some other level.
Jane?
I just wanted to say that something that Suzanne said was something I've heard a lot from people in the conservation community, that people have high hopes that our group and this money will show that the business as usual thing at ODFW is pushed forward on the conservation strategy and other things involving non-game species. And I hope that we will all take that to heart, because that's why Suzanne's not with us, because she feels like it is business as usual. And so how do we change that?
Thank you, Jane. That's a great comment. And I just to finish this, I looked into the whole situation, and they did not move forward with the resolution that Suzanne had hoped. But I also learned that, and Mark Labhart, you can clarify this if I get it wrong, it really wasn't set up to do just that. The way the process is set up, they weren't really able to act. And what they did do is say, we're going to look at this and we're going to try to find some answers and come up with a solution and figure out what's going on the ground. So they didn't just drop it. And with that, I asked Davia to poke around a little bit, because they are exploring the beaver issue on national forests, and there may be a place for us to facilitate that. So if there's a research project or a rehabilitation project or something that we can insert ourselves in, that might be a way to, as Mauricio puts it, to honor Suzanne and her passion for what we're doing. So just to move past that, we're not forgetting it. We're not forgetting Suzanne, and we will keep an eye on that. And Davia at some point may have some information for us. Okay, so with that, I appreciate everyone's comments. That was great.
Do you want to hear who else is on the line, Carl, before we jump further
yes.
in?
Thank you, Sherilyn. Yes, please do that. Go ahead and
It
run.
looks like we have Michelle Tate from ODFW, a couple of members from the public, Jim Atkinson from OHA, Greg Mintz from Representative Helms' office, Kay Brown from RNE. Megan, maybe you could tell us where you're from. Megan Martin.
Yeah, I'm representing the Oregon chapter of the Wildlife Society. I'm the current president.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah. And then Jim Greer, remind us where you're from.
From Sisters, Oregon, a very interested citizen.
Thanks, Jim. I think that's everyone, Carl. You're on mute, Carl.
All right, thank you. We've got to move on with approving the minutes. Do we have, Davia, do you happen to have that official motion on that we can say it? I mean,
yes, I'm sorry, let me pull that up. I probably should apologize to Michelle for not pulling it up.
I'm still recovering from that meeting that you were just discussing, so I can't say that I'm on the ball as far as ahead of you at this time, Davia.
My computer appears to be doing some sort of update. But it's coming.
While we're waiting for that, I know we had shorter time to review it this time. Does anybody have any changes or things to discuss in the minutes before we go to a motion? Okay.
I keep waiting for Suzanne to speak up. Didn't happen. Davia, have you got that? Oh, there we go. Can someone go ahead and make a motion?
Yeah, I will. This is Mark. I move to approve the June 3rd, 2020 meeting minutes with a continued authority to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation.
We have a second?
This is Jane. I will second it.
All in favor, raise your hands. Looks like it passed. Okay, so that passed and we're good with that. And one thing, Our last meetings, we worked really hard and got a lot of stuff done, a lot of groundwork we got covered, which was great. I'm very happy that we were able to achieve that, but it was tedious. And now we can move on and get to work on some exciting things. What I'd like to do today is, just to reiterate, we find ourselves in a situation with a not insignificant amount of money that fortunately is growing on a daily basis, not in big numbers, but people are still buying licenses. Money is going into the fund, and then we again found that we could spend that money, which is very helpful. And given that, the ability to spend the money and the fact it isn't huge numbers, but enough to be meaningful, we decided to start funding some projects on the ground. And in the big scheme of things, we wanted to have a quite diverse portfolio of projects to develop in the short term. As the way I look at this, it's to help us, this committee, to figure out exactly what it is we are trying to do and to demonstrate to the citizens of Oregon what we're doing, and by that mechanism facilitate our fundraising, which we can roll out very much in conjunction with these projects. Another important thing is to let our stakeholders, our partners, all of the people that have participated and are interested in what we're doing, know that we're proceeding with this, and they can be thinking about projects and moving forward. So today, we still have a little bit of the nuts and bolts work to do, in that I want to start off by talking about some criteria. First of all, for this preliminary portfolio of projects, what exactly, I think it's very important that we have a suite of projects that complement each other with broad geography, broad categories of whatever it is it's addressing. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I think it would be very important to start setting some criteria on how we're going to judge these. We don't want this just to be a rubber stamp thing where a committee member says, oh, I got this great project, let's do this. We don't want to do that. We want to have some criteria that we can use to defend our actions. At the same time, we have, in our rules and the way we set things up, we've left ourselves quite a bit of latitude. And so we can be very selective. We don't have to follow really strict criteria like we would if we were putting out an RFP, which in the future we will be doing. But until we have a better sense of where we're at, I think it's important for us to keep that latitude. Davia, this might be a good time for you. We have it in here more towards the end, but I think it's a good idea for now, Davia, for you to tell us a little bit about where the funding is and also some of the mechanics of how the money gets dispersed and the various ways you had told me that this all moves forward. Is that something you can do for us?
Sure thing. Yeah, so first, as of this morning, we've got about $72,000 in our account that's available to be spent when the committee's ready to do so. And that is growing by a couple $100 a day, which is really exciting. And the fundraising committee had some really good progress in the last week and a half, and is targeting July 15th to launch the real campaign. And there'll soon be a letter circulating. I'm not sure exactly who it will come from, if it'll come from Representative Helm's office or one of the NGO partners that are helping put this all together, that will go out and ask people to sign on and support. And in doing that, in signing on to that support letter, an organization will be committing to having their name and logo associated with the Conservation Recreation Fund, as well as making some commitment that they intend to reach out to their members and make the ask and share on their social media. And we've got some really great progress that's happening on the materials for that. So that's good news on the fundraising front. And then on to really what Carl asked me about the mechanics of all of this. For the short-term expenditures, the idea would be that you, the committee, identify projects, work with partners to put together some sort of consistent approach to describing what those projects are and the expense and the details of those projects. And I'm working right now with the contracting side of ODF&W, and we're looking at the applications that Restoration Enhancement Board and the Access and Habitat Board use for their projects, because they do similar work. And that we would then have those, and you all will review them, and as soon as the next meeting, depending on decisions you make later today. And for each project, you all will have a vote on whether you intend to recommend that for funding. And then once that vote happens, that's officially recommended by this committee. And then we need to take it to the commission for their approval. So the current plan with the commission is there's a meeting on July 10th, which I believe is 2 weeks from now on a Friday. And Carl's going to be part of what we call the director's report, which is a time at the beginning of the commission meeting when Director Melcher can bring in informational pieces for the commission. And Carl will go there just to introduce the committee formally to the commission, because it's an interesting place where you all were appointed by the governor, but you really report to the commission and make recommendations to the commission. So Carl will go and let them know what we've been up to, talk to them about the decisions you all made for the expenditure framework, and that you're working on some early expenditures from the fund. That would then set us up to actually bring projects to the August or September commission meetings, depending on the timing and what's already on the agenda for those commission meetings. So those short-term projects will need to have some sort of formal form that we've filled out and submitted that you all can all review and compare consistently between other ones you might be looking at, as well as to forward on to the commission for their review when they make their decision. So that's happening sort of in the background here where we're looking at the other forms, but I think we can talk about that later today too if we want to, what information you want to collect from people submitting projects or whoever we're working on with projects. If there's a project that maybe the committee wants to develop itself, we would use that same form. And so then once the commission votes to approve your recommendations and actually fund them, then we'll enter into the contracting phase, and we'll have a standard form that we'll also use very similarly to the Restoration Enhancement and the Access and Habitat Boards that will form that agreement to pass the funds actually out of ODF&W into the person or organization doing the project.
Great, Davia, thank you. So
Marette has her hand up. Did you have a question, Marette?
I do. Sort of the elephant in the room for me is the match. Was the money, the $72,000, collected with the promise that there would be a match?
Yes. And
so it was. And I guess I'm just worried about betrayal of public trust. You know, if I was giving something and I expected a match and then there wasn't a match, and is the new fundraising that goes forward still promising a match, or how are we going to deal with that?
Excellent question. So Representative Helm has been representing this very well in conversations with the legislature, and there's only rumors at this point, but our special fund appropriation that is the match is money that's kind of there. So it's a lot easier for the legislature to use that for other purposes. It's tricky to know right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. The legislature is not planning to take up a special session on budget until after mid-July, which is they're waiting for federal legislation to see if there's funding for states, and then they'll take up state legislation. So we are in a tricky spot of needing to proceed as planned, because as of now, the match is still there waiting for us. Recognizing that this money that we have now was raised with the promise of match. We've shared that information with the Ways and Means staff in the legislature. They're aware of how much we've raised, and they're aware that it was raised with the promise of match. And so we haven't really talked about it directly, I guess, on the fundraising committee. The sort of the more generic marketing concepts don't reference the possible match, but the details, you know, if someone clicks on the link and goes to the detail page, in theory, we still have that concept of the match in there. That's an important question to think about, because we're not confident that we can promise that match. I think one of the best case scenarios would be that the legislature asks us how much we have in hand, and they leave us at least that match if they want to repurpose that $1 million of general fund.
Moret, I had discussed that very issue with Representative Helm, and the way the way it was left when he and I discussed is that he felt that whatever we raise will very likely be matched. They won't go into that because, as you said, that is a huge breach of public trust. And so after talking with him and asking him if he agreed, he felt that we should proceed as if we were going to get the match, and that up to whatever it is we raise. And that's one of the other reasons to try to get this fundraising campaign rolling and really bump that number up, because we'll have a higher likelihood of having a big number to match. Right now we're talking about a $70,000 match, which is not insignificant. But so the way I'm, in my own mind, the way I'm doing this, I'm proceeding as if, okay, we're going to get that match. And everything seems to indicate it. And we have Representative Helm's assurance that he's certainly going in that direction. So I hope that clarifies things. Mark Labhart, did you have something?
Yep, I think you Carl, explained it very well, and so did Davia. I might just add that I had a personal conversation with one of the co-chairs of Ways and Means and made it very clear that the donations that were given were in anticipation of a match, and that that needed to be protected. So it is clear at the highest levels of the Budget, Ways and Means Committee that we are watching, and we expect there to be a match as identified in the statute.
Mark, it's great having you being able to communicate with those guys. That's really helpful that you're keeping that in front of them. So thank you very much for that. Mark Stern?
Yeah, I had a slightly different question maybe. And, you know, Davia, I think you explained it, but interested in your perspective, or also Mark Labhart, just in terms of the process of selecting projects, these small projects at the get-go here, are there any other sideboards from the department or from the commission's perspective that we sort of need to be aware of or consider that haven't been daylighted yet?
I think from my perspective, everything has been daylighted, and I think something, maybe Moret or Jane said it before, that my hope, and this is sort of my hope from my position, is that we look for things that are innovative and different, that ODFW wouldn't fund with other fund sources, or wouldn't be able to fund with other fund sources. I think that's the kind of thing that helps us turn the ship, like Moret was talking about. So that's, I think, a consideration, but not a formal sideboard, not a restriction in any way.
That's a great question. Mauricio?
Yeah, I just had a procedural question on this. So from the way I understand it, originally, the $1 million would be matched once we reach the original $1 million. But now I'm hearing that we will be potentially matched, or we should operate as if we were going to be matched whatever we raise. But we haven't determined when that match would take effect, correct? Or is there some sort of conversation that has taken, and the reason why I'm asking is because let's say if we establish that after every $100,000 the match would, then that would give us leverage to determine as projects come our way what is the scope of the projects and the expanse of those projects that we could take on potentially, and then that would also determine when we could enable either the RFP system or what other ways we would have to give that money away to those projects.
Mauricio, that's a really good point, and maybe we should have you talk to Representative Helm, because he's sort of designing the campaign on how to, or the strategy on how to make this happen. And one of the points that came up in our discussions was, okay, if they tell us we're taking your money down to your match, then we would say, okay, that's what's happening, but give us the money now. Don't make us wait till whatever the date was, July 1st, 2021. Let's get the money now and move. Or what you just said, I liked a lot, is like, okay, every $100,000 we raise, when we hit that mark, give us $100,000 a match. So we'll carry that to Representative Helm, and because he's thinking about that strategy now. And certainly if they do take that money, that gives us some leverage to say, let's just get the money now. So that's a really good point.
Well, I think also in answer to Mauricio's question, the timing is dictated by what the legislature is going to do, right? So the legislature in 2019, they made a special appropriation. So for the 2019-2021 biennium, they kind of put this $1 million in a box, a spreadsheet box for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we could open that box when we raised $1 million and have that money in hand. And so right now with the budget situation and the loss in tax revenue, the loss in lottery fund, the general budget picture, the legislature is expected to hold a special session sometimes this summer where they're going to go back to what they did in 2019, and they're going to open every box and say, well, is this the best use of that money, or can we repurpose it to some gap that's emerged since then? And so there's a sort of that one-time decision point that will come. And so, and that will kind of set the number. So in theory, they could at that point say, well, we're actually going to take 500,000 of it for X other purpose and leave 500,000. And that might give us the opportunity to do something like that, Mauricio, where we could try to set up a match as we go to that 500,000. But if at that time we have 112,000, they would likely leave us the 112,000 match and then take that 888,000 for other purposes. So it would be gone at that point. And so it's really that special session, whenever they schedule that, will be the opportunity for them to make those changes.
Mark,
well, very good analogy. I would just add that we just don't know the answer to these questions. And we won't know until the special session, not the coming one, but the next one that's this fall. And we'll have that clear. But I think that's a really good discussion with Representative Helm and the co-chairs of Ways and Means to have that discussion with them so they clearly understand that before we get to that session and have that discussion. So I think this is a really good offer of ideas here that we could put on the table. So I really appreciate that, and I'm sure looks like Greg's on the phone too, or on the conference call, so he's listening, so he can hear that too. And we meet every couple of weeks, the funding committee, to talk about strategies and stuff. So I think this is a very, very appropriate discussion. But we just won't know the end of all this discussion until the legislature opens those boxes and decides how much to leave in our box.
Thank you, Mark. And I think it also makes it more compelling for us to get this stuff done, to get a package, get this on the ground, concrete, so that it's not ephemeral. When Representative Helms goes to talk to them and we say, look at this, we're doing this. And the other important thing is we can pick criteria that where it's on the ground sooner than later. And that's what we need in the state. We need to start putting money out the door, get projects going. So that should help all of us to be dedicated to making all this happen. And so with that in mind, what I would like, so just again to reiterate, I'd like to this morning just go through, so we have some criteria both for the portfolio, the bigger portfolio, and then on individual projects. So we have some metrics on that, and we'll move to that. And then ultimately by the end of the day, with that done in the morning, we'll have an opportunity among ourselves to bring projects forward and kind of discuss it, you know, even in broad terms, or if people have really specific terms. By the end of the day, we're going to have some ideas that we can then go out and get true proposals, like the real deal, so that we can then vet those proposals. Of course, we're not going to have any written hard proposals today, but we're going to generate some ideas, and some, like for instance, I know of one that's pretty much the proposals written. Well, we will get those proposals, say for the next meeting, approve whatever number of those, and then be ready to take that to the commission, hopefully as soon as August, but maybe September. At the same time, that fund is growing, and I also want to reiterate to our stakeholders and our partners that are out there in the audience today, and that we're going to keep going. We're going to keep this process going till we have a better idea what numbers we have in our budget. Before we start doing RFPs and a really competitive process where we're just opening it up, we don't have that now. So we still have this thing where money's coming in. We're going to get it out the door as fast as we can to good projects. So anyway, we're setting the stage for that. So with that being said, David, are you able to bring up on your screen those portfolio metrics? Like for instance, yeah, I think it looks like she can do that. So this is, again, just some, I put this, Davia and I and Mauricio, we put these things together and we want to talk about them. So this first one is, what do we want this portfolio to look like? And these are just 4 kind of ideas to begin the discussion. So diverse geography, diverse taxonomically, we'd like to represent as many different things as we can, different program priorities, and diverse partners. And so let's have a discussion now on this. Just what we're asking is, we want this portfolio somewhere between 4 to 6 to 7 projects. And I guess to help frame this further, Davia said we have $70,000. I don't want to, this portfolio, I don't think necessarily has to go right to that 70,000, but close. Say somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000, with anywhere from 4 to 8 projects, depending on how much each project requires. We're going to have this portfolio, this first portfolio. And so what do we want that to look like? And so I'd open it up. Anyone have any thoughts on these criteria or different criteria to add? Mauricio?
Yes, I just wanted to add that another thing that we need to look at as we're trying to understand what the metrics are and the individual project metrics. Like, during this process, one of the reasons that we're trying to move these funds quicker and go into good projects right away is also to make the better case for marketing and fundraising committee. How is that we can paint the better picture of what the fund is and what we're doing for it, so that we create awareness and sort of imagine it's starting to establish the profile of the fund, so that for for future efforts, it's very clear that we are addressing all these things, that are engaged in multiple partners, that are trying to make sure that stakeholders are being represented adequately, and that the geography and all these other aspects that we've already discussed in our framework are being addressed adequately. So that's something that probably we want to keep in the back of our minds as we move forward through this, through the understanding of these concepts.
Thanks, Mauricio. Mark Stern, what do you think about these portfolio metrics?
Well, I had a little bit of time to think about them. I guess some initial thoughts are I think they're good. Other things that come to mind, and it might slide a little bit into individual project metrics, but what is the timeliness of the project? I think for the reasons that were stated, we want to show something that's going to happen. So the project that's in the works and is going to hit the ground in 4 years is of less interest, I think, in some ways at this point in time. I guess the other one that I see in there is some sense of broad appeal. And maybe that's inherent when you roll up all of those things together, but I think we want to have something that is well received, is marketable, and that's probably somewhat in the eyes of the beholder a little bit, so you have to be careful there. But I guess I think about it in terms of that lens when you look at the portfolio metrics. I had some other thoughts on the individual project metrics, but Carl, I wasn't sure if you were trying to sort of take these one at a time.
I think, I mean, maybe we can discuss them. Why don't we pull up these individual project metrics? Because I think you're right. They sort of slide back and forth. I think for the portfolio, this it's pretty simple. We want diversity in every way, and that covers it. Just as long as we have that overarching idea. The good ideas you mentioned, like getting it on the ground quickly, those things can be put into the individual project metrics that we can then use to each project say, well, that's a great project, but it's not happened till 2000 or 2022, so that doesn't rank high. So that's probably the place to put that, I think, is that timeliness thing. And Mark, could you restate? I liked what you said about the broad support. We sort of have a category down there for broad support, but I liked what how you stated it in terms of appeal. And I don't remember exactly what you said, but I liked it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I said either, but I think just that point of sort of broad appeal and interest so that a lot of people would rally around it.
Chris Hager, what do you think? I'm catching Chris to see if he's paying attention.
No, I've been going through this, and I keep on coming back to, well, I like it so far. I do want to see if we should be putting something in there, because since we went from the expenditure document to now this individual document, we kind of lost that part, given the current times of, does it generate economic and social value at the same time? Just given the certain times of COVID, and economic outlook in general, that whole creating jobs aspect of it, which I just haven't seen been brought back up. Something that Carl, you and I had talked about offline for a bit.
Chris, I'm totally fine with including that within our individual project metrics. Yeah. I would like to see it. I think that's important. I agree. If you think as adding that in, I'm totally with it. Does anybody not like that or feel that it isn't appropriate to have something in there about that there's on the ground activity? It's it's got an economic benefit. You know, like we might have two very similar projects that are really great, but one of them's going to lead to hiring more people and more on the ground work, and that might give it more credence and a higher ranking if we did it that way.
Ratio?
I can see that as being of the part of the cost-benefit ratio, just sort of like looking at more of a value-based metrics and not necessarily as exclusively as revenue return, and so that let's say, as you put it, if it has a social benefit that outweighs how much it would be measured in the amount of ROI, then that makes sense to have there as one of the main metrics.
So do you think that cost benefit ratio, see, the purpose of that was kind of to say, you know, we want you to have a lot of, the more match we have, the better. You know, that's not exactly right. We don't want to be $10,000 of a $2 million project. We want to be $10,000 with some match, with some meaningful match, but it's that cost benefit ratio was, we're going to make a difference by spending this money. Like if we don't spend this money, maybe that whole thing's not going to go, and they're going to be able to cross the finish line. That's what that cost benefit ratio thing's about. But I think what Chris is more specifically talking about is that concept of economic stimulation by getting these projects on the ground. And we can be very as specific as we want to be. There's actually a calculator for that on that ecosystem workforce program website, where you can plug in what the economic benefits are going to be if you take a proposal and take the pieces and put it in. But I don't think we have to be that specific. I do think it's nice to have that in there as a metric, as saying that, or as a goal, as something that we're trying to achieve. And that's also beneficial when you're in the legislature. It's like, look, we're going to try to do projects that have a positive economic benefit beyond just the cost benefit ratio as outlined there. Jane, do you have something else to add to that?
You know, I objected to that last time, and I object to it again, because I think there's a lot of good science-based projects that are not going to be economic stimulators, and I'm just not sure that's our job. I think we're looking out here for the conservation strategy and the animals and the species, and if we start tacking, I mean, that's a worthy thing, but to say that we're going to rate projects less because they don't do that just doesn't work for me.
Jane, now I'm remembering why we didn't put this in, why we didn't put it in here. Because
right.
Comments, that's why that, and I just sort of reinvented the wheel again in my mind. But again, I would like for there somewhere, so that when we're having a conversation with the legislation, that's, maybe it isn't like written down, but it's like, that's part of what we're doing. I think that's an important thing. Barrett?
So I was thinking that one criteria might need to be sort of track record of the organization that's doing it, or proposing. Are they likely to be successful? Have they been successful before? It's really important that this money doesn't just go down a rabbit hole. So I'm not sure how to get at that, but sometimes you have to show that you have a proven track record.
Yeah, Maretta, I agree. I think that's a good one. I think part of it for me sort of comes under some category of partners and partnership. What's the breadth of the partnership? And as you said, the track record and the capacity to do what they say they're going to do in a timely manner. And I also look at it a little bit as to make sure that they have all the appropriate partners for that project at the table, because sometimes unintentionally a project may get launched, but it's forgotten some key partners to a project. So that would be another lens to look at it through.
One very quick thing to add to what Mark was just speaking to exactly is just the level of buy-in of those project partners, right? So whether that's measured through letters of support or letters of commitment or something like that, there's an important check-in step, I think, in looking at individual projects that say they're going to work with someone versus whether or not those partners say they're invested in the project itself. So just some way to formally check in on that is a pretty standard practice that I'd encourage the group to use here too.
Hey, Kaylin, what are you thinking about this?
The only other thing that maybe doesn't repeat the conversation is difference of opinion, I think, Carl, with you on the cost-benefit ratio, where I would say in some ways, even if it's a smaller proportion of a full project budget, those bigger projects might have a bigger impact overall, might be more interesting to the public, might gain broader attention, or have broader benefit to them. And so yeah, I'm just less sure. I'm sorry, the other thing is it's easier to talk about leveraging, right, if OCRF is a very small portion of a project rather than the major portion of it. So yeah, I guess I see that almost exactly in the reverse, but that's okay.
I had another lens on that is also, I think you could have a large project, but if the OCRF part was funding a piece that otherwise wasn't going to get funded, you could have a sort of a distinct piece of a larger project that would be important to recognize as well.
Sorry, and then one more thought. Timeliness might speak to relevance in terms of how quickly can it get on the ground. But another thing related to timeliness, and this did come up in conversations with the governor's task force on the outdoors, was, and another sort of grant worlds that I'm engaged in, is just does the project have all of the necessary approvals in place, right? So on the far end, if it's a project that requires NEPA, you would want that NEPA to be done before OCRF funded the project. And so maybe it's permitting, maybe it's resource plans, that sort of thing. But basically we're, I think, wanting to fund things that are ready to go. And sometimes there's formal approval steps that we would want to be looking at, I think.
That's a good addition. I like that. It's not, this cost benefit ratio thing, I can see it going both ways. And I don't know that we have to tie our hands with saying that we're going to do it one way or the other. You're right. There are some really big projects that are still trying to raise money, and $10,000 would help them, but it's only like it's $1 million, but $10,000 is $10,000. So we wouldn't want to say no to that if it's a really worthwhile project and meets all our other criteria. So maybe we just don't want, it's like we're looking for both of those, I guess, maybe, but you have to meet all the other criteria. It'd be great for us to be the game changer to get this project done, but there are other good projects too. So maybe we don't want to have that cost benefit thing to be too specific. So I think the comments, I'm sort of fine with even taking that out because we could get both, and we may easily get a project that we're going to make the total difference, or it's a wonderful. I'm thinking of the Gilchrist Wildlife Crossing, where they got, like, they need $1 million, they got 700,000. Well, we can, $10,000 is going to help them with that, and it's a great project. We don't want to not be able to do something like that.
By taking it off, you allow it to be more subjective, right? If it's in the criteria, it's more objective, and you have to score it. Ratio, sorry.
No, yes, I was agreeing with you, Carl. I think that might be a little limiting. I was also thinking of some other instances, and let's say a project is may not be able to take off precisely because it's something that costs $10,000 or $15,000, maybe not something partnerships, partners want to jump in because maybe it's too small for them. But this would be an opportunity for those that if they fit the rest of the criteria, for them to get funding they wouldn't otherwise get elsewhere. And so if they already feel that they have a proven record and all these checks and balances that I think are very important, if we were to put more weight in any of on the cost benefit ratio either way, I think would be limiting ourselves to receiving other great ideas that wouldn't be otherwise funded.
So I'm hearing maybe we just take that cost benefit ratio thing out of there. Does that sound all right? Anybody object to that? Well then, where's Suzanne when you need her? Dang. Keep looking for her hand up. It's not there. Okay. Any other comments on these? We're getting through these pretty quick. I feel pretty good about them. I think we all know what it is. A lot of this is to make sure that we're doing this right and that we're not going to be criticized, or we can defend ourselves and say, look, we had some criteria. We know what we're looking for. Like if we don't fund somebody, they're going to say, well, what about this? And we need to have some criteria. But again, we don't want to limit ourselves. Are we feeling pretty good about this as it is?
Hey, Carl, I wonder if somewhere in there, and maybe it would be in a broader announcement, but just a reiteration that it's projects that are in support of the Oregon Conservation Strategy, just as maybe that's a given and it's understood, but.
Mark, that's a great, I totally agree. That is not in here.
I would assume some of your framework language that you approve should set that up. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I mean, that's really clear in the program priorities. We could add especially the OCSS to this one if we wanted to, but I think.
I have two things on that. I do think that someone brought this up earlier that I meant to comment on. We do have all that framework stuff that we did that's codified all of those things, and all of these projects fit under that. So the diversity, all of the issues that we grappled with, these still, I think our process still is being driven by those criteria and priorities we devised. But with that being said, for one thing, I want to keep that Oregon Conservation Strategy out there in front of people. And so I agree with Mark. I would like to, I think Dowie and you and I even had that conversation. I'd like to have that in there somewhere, just saying it's got to be, it's implicit, it's understood, it's got to be consistent with Oregon Conservation Strategy. I mean, that's if nothing else, that's coverage for us. That's like, that's our criteria. we're using something. We're not just arbitrarily coming up with things. And so I would like to have something in there, unless anybody has a reason not to have that. I agree with Mark on that. Well, great, man. That's great. We're smoking right along.
A clarifying question. When we're talking about individual project metrics, are we thinking about that just in terms of these short-term projects, or is this sort of what we're putting in place for all projects in the future?
No, Mark, I think the intention is for this portfolio of roughly $50,000, $60,000, and a portfolio of 5 to 10 projects. However, if it looks like, thanks for bringing that up. So no, this is not like our forever, this is what we're going to follow. If it's like they don't take our $1 million and we're going to raise $1 million, and we have to rethink it. And we may use some of these criteria, but that's a whole different animal there. That's when we're doing RFPs. And but as long as we're operating under this current scenario where we have money trickling in, and now we're going to have a fundraising campaign, and we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars yet. I think that's what this is applying to, is this short-term. And let's say we just keep going along here and we keep raising, $10,000 a month, and we have the campaign, we got another $30,000. We can continue to use this and keep generating projects with this process until we get more clarity with what's going to ultimately happen. Does that make sense? Am I clarifying? Does that clarify to you what I'm thinking? Does that sound okay, Mark? Okay, great. All right. So yeah. So if we have this in place, I think that's a good place to start. That helps us start thinking about it. So now, Davia, we're way ahead of on the agenda, I think, unless there's something. No, here we go. So we're ready to start talking about it. Oh, we're behind schedule. We're ahead of schedule. All right. Well, good then.
Really good.
So with that all being said, why don't we start? We had asked last time for you to kind of go out, talk to your stakeholders, or think about yourselves. Do we have some projects out there that we want to talk about and kind of come up with to be able to say, yeah, I like that. Let's have them do a proposal. I think that's what we're trying to do today. By the end of the day, have some list of projects that sound really good, fit our criteria, and then we can solicit true proposals. And what I'd like to start with actually is Kalen, because I always keep thinking Kalen's going to be leaving us because he seems to have to do that. So before we lose him, or he's got some other thing he has to do, Kalen told me about quite a few exciting recreation projects kind of in that realm. And I thought it might be good to start with having him put some of those out there for us.
Can I just interrupt before you go, Kaylin? Do you guys want a whiteboard, or do you want to look at each other? And I could take notes on the other screen.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Davia. We can just capture them and then show them later.
Yeah, that might be good.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes. Kalen?
Yep. And in particular, I was hoping to add to the list that was sent around in advance. So maybe to share a couple of additional ideas here and then highlight one of the projects that was on the list. And I'll start with that one that was on the list provided in advance. I think I'm just going to go through three projects. One is related to mapping, one is translation, and one is an on-the-ground project on the Klamath River. So I'll do translation first, and then pitch you a little bit about mapping, and then Klamath. So, I mean, as evidenced by our round of introductions and supported by data of license sales and campground reservations and the like, it's clear that folks are drawn to the outdoors right now. We're seeing high, or in some places historic, levels of use. And you fold on top of that reduced agency budgets, not just the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, but there's a capacity shortfall. And so we know that recreation has impacts, period, that, in some way, all recreation is consumptive. It's consumptive of solitude, it's consumptive of a direct resource, whatever that might be. So going back a couple of months now, back to April, when the state was looking at reopening parks and trails and public lands and water access, we recognized the importance of education right now, that we needed to be communicating with the public about how things were going to look different on the ground. And we've been doing that. Agencies have individually, nonprofits and businesses are stepping up, but we're still seeing frustrated Oregonians not understanding the restrictions that are in place. We're seeing some resource impacts from the kind of difference in closed restrooms or having to call ahead for reservations, etc. And so that was all a lot of context to say, while we're doing education and we've produced a responsible recreation toolkit at the statewide level, there's a lot of additional outreach that could and should be happening to both residents of the state and visitors for whom English is not their first language. And so there's an organization called Viva Northwest that has a contract in place. They have the partnership there with the Oregon Health Authority. And that contract allows Viva Northwest to be kind of in the pole position to translate all sorts of different materials into more than 20 different languages related to public health guidance. And what they're working on right now is a series of short videos, like a minute to 2 minutes each, that would be focused on recreation specifically. Others have focused on physical distancing and other things we're dealing with during COVID. So under the example projects spreadsheet, it's translation of existing materials. That's what I read into it. Is essentially providing funding to Viva Northwest to create some of these videos in languages other than English and share out through their networks to help folks get outdoors safely right now. And each video comes at a cost of about $1,500. There are other potential funding sources out there from the private philanthropic world, but there aren't from state agency budgets. As far as I know, Oregon Health Authority hasn't been able to find any money. And when this project kicked off, I thought that I would be able to fund these directly. That's no longer the case. So that's project number one idea.
Kaylin, before you go on,
yeah.
Have you worked with Viva Northwest in the past, or have any specific?
I have, yeah. Viva Northwest does a variety of things quite expertly. The organization is a nonprofit that was formed both to help introduce, in particular, the Latinx community to the outdoors through facilitated experiences. So helping folks understand what you need to go on a hike safely, or providing interpretation, or to go paddleboarding for the first time, or go fishing. They also work to kind of train up leaders out of that pool of folks who go on trips in the first place, which is pretty cool. It's kind of its own talent pipeline. And then there's an interest, the big picture interest is in diversifying our natural resource related career pathways. And so it's an organization that I'm inspired by. I know the founder and have worked on a variety of different projects with Jorge. But it's for this group's attention, it's kind of like the relationship that Viva Northwest has with the Oregon Health Authority is a really key piece, because it means if we were able to provide funding, these could become kind of the official responsible recreation videos for the state right now, and for the next year or however long this ends up being timely and relevant.
Well, that's great. It sounds great, but I'll just say that I've had some private conversations about deliverables with that entity, and that would be part of our criteria if they present a proposal, we need to get a track record for that. But I'll just say that I've heard some concerns about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. So that would go on. So what I think we should do is you outline that very well. That goes on our list, and we can talk about the list sort of towards the end of the day. Does anyone have any questions for Kaylin on that specific issue? Kaylin, why don't you proceed?
Okay. Idea number 2 is, and these are all really just projects that I'm spending a lot of time on or thinking about, so that's why they came up. Idea number 2 is an as yet to be launched map and related application that'll be launched within the next 2 weeks, trying to show folks what areas of the state are currently open, restricted, or closed to outdoor recreation. There's more than 7,200 different sites across the state. It's kind of a recreation inventory of sorts, and we're trying to build in, and this time only in English, responsible recreation messaging in addition to a measure of how popular a certain park or trailhead or boat ramp might be, so that folks can find uncrowded places to go outdoors. The reason this has come up as a project for me is that it's really hard to answer the question, what can I do, where can I go, what's safe right now in the outdoors if you're new to the outdoors. For the folks on this committee, based on your reports, I think you probably have some favorite places and know how to navigate the kind of additional restrictions right now, but for many people, pointing them to, I think I have a list now of 15 different local, state, and federal agency websites that you could go to learn this information. Anyway, based on a PPP loan, I've been working with a design firm out of Portland and the nonprofit Trust for Public Lands and our SCORP database to build this website. It'll launch in 2 weeks. It doesn't necessarily need OCRF funding to succeed, but we got a PPP loan and a grant from Google, essentially, to piece this together. And that design firm is going to go back to their normal core business, and it's a resource, like I said, that'll be launching within 2 weeks that I think will have some long-term benefit. And I don't know exactly what the ask would be, so probably need to get more data, but if it's something the committee was interested in learning more about, I can bring back more information. The project is called Park Pulse.
Man, that would be really, if we had money today, that would be like a really timely thing to do. But the way our timeline is we wouldn't be able to, it's going to be September, August, September.
Yeah, the costs of a website, especially given the amount of data, are pretty significant. And so there's ongoing updates and hosting, other costs associated with it. And it's really unclear where this project is going to live once the PPP loan runs out in 8 days. And so even though the timing doesn't seem exactly right, if the website launches, gets traffic, and works, it's something that could have a longer lifespan, but I don't know exactly what the ask is there. I just wanted to bring it up because it's exciting to me and thought it might be relevant to this group.
Any comments for Kaylin on that? Don't see any as usual. I have some. I'd love it. And if this was part of our fundraising campaign, and we were able to say OCRF stepped up, did this. Here's where you go. Our name was on that. That is perfect. It's a perfect thing. It's our mandate. It fits everything that's that recreation piece that we sort of had some trouble dealing with, and I like it, but it's just a question of timing. So.
Yeah, just maybe one more additional tiny pitch within the pitch. If folks here have visited the Oregon State Parks website in the last month, 6 weeks, you've noticed a heat map, a status map that lives on that website. The idea is basically to do that for the state, and we've already received national interest, which is sort of a second thing. But if it works here in Oregon, it's quite possible that this project could be supported around the country. And that state parks website has seen tens of thousands of hits. So it's driving traffic because folks are hungry for this information.
Chris Hager?
Yeah, so Kaylin, with that, with what you guys are looking into right now, are you guys just looking at just state parks or city parks or just kind of everything under the sun? Federal?
Yeah, it's an imperfect everything. So with the governor's task force, we talked about this recreation inventory idea sort of separate from jurisdiction, right? So state park, BLM, Forest Service, national park, local park, county park, it gets confusing. The data that we'll be able to show is from, I learned something and a lot of things in this process, but that there's over 400 different recreation providers in the state. Yeah. And the data is trying to bring in all of those different entities. Yeah.
So when you say recreational providers, are you talking about like kayaking and versus mountain biking? Those are two individual recreational providers, or?
No, like your city parks versus county parks versus Department of Forestry versus ODF managed lands. There's more than 400 of those different agencies in the state of Oregon. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, thanks to some past work, we have that GIS database, but it lives in a way that's professionally useful, but not publicly consumable, basically. So we're just trying to make it a little easier to understand.
So Kaylin, you said it's called Park Pulse. Is it intended to sort of grow into a user interface for all recreational uses, or is it really focused on status and this situation?
Yeah, so the potential use cases are really broad. The reason I think we were able to get some traction right now is that it's just confusing. It's really confusing what's open and what's closed. And so there's basic information pulled from those different agencies about fishing is available at this site. To learn more, you would have to leave and go to ODF's website, right? But yeah, the use case for now is definitely related to what's open, what's closed, what restrictions exist, and kind of what's near you, what's close to home. Because at least when we started the project, the whole state was still under a stay-home order. We weren't sure what distance we'd be able to or be encouraged to travel. So,
Kaylin, what's your third one?
Third one is gauging the committee's interest in being involved in some way in the very large effort on the Klamath River in both California and Oregon that, if approved, will result in the removal of 4 dams and restore many miles of river ecosystem. And the gap in particular that's been identified, this is another project I'm working on in collaboration with ODFW, is trying to plan for future recreational access points and interpretation along that Klamath River corridor. It is about a $2 million project to build the 3 boat ramps that are pretty far along in the planning process, but there's additional design work, sort of collaborative facilitation work, interpretation or educational site design, and just outright construction that are a gap that together that's about $2 million. And so this is maybe less timely in some ways because, you know, Final project approval hasn't been given yet, and construction crews aren't breaking ground, but ODFW is identified as the successor land manager. So land will be transferred from a power company to ODFW to manage for public access and conservation goals. And we don't, as a state, know where the money is going to come from to build those recreation sites. But there's a lot of work that's gone into it at this point. And so this is one, it's a little bit further out, but literally anything would be helpful. And with constraints about what the specific, use could go towards, I think would be appropriate.
That's my eco region, of course, and I'm very interested in supporting that process in any way. Are there pieces that are available, certain specific things that are going on right now, like planning or where we would seem to be most appropriate would be interpretive situations and things like that. Is there anything like that happening that could be identified?
Yeah, interpretation work could be going on right now, but the gap, frankly, is in planning and project support. I would steer away from construction. As far as I know, there is no sort of how am I trying to say this? If this land transfer happens, what happens to those lands in the long term, how they're funded, how they're managed, by whom, with what partnerships in place, is still an open question. And so just some very baseline planning dollar assistance would be valuable.
Right, thank you. Chris Hager?
I'm also very much in favor of hopefully supporting this project or a part of this project moving forward. One of the big things, though, it would be interesting to kind of help out towards the access part, especially with the building of the boat ramps. I know the only question that I do have, though, is, and maybe this is just getting too much into the weeds right now, but I know that some part of the recreational community was upset about the amount of access proposed, wanting more, and I guess just cautioning if we do go down that rabbit hole, maintaining a fine line between access and what we actually do want to preserve within that new area, which I know you're aware of, Kaylin. But.
Yeah. Much of the consternation, I guess, locally between fishing outfitters, rafting outfitters, and the recreating public has less to do with the exact amount and location of proposed access than the way that the facilitation has gone between partners and the lack of funding that's currently identified while the project is right around the corner. So basically, the recreation community, and this is overly broad to summarize, but they're concerned that the dams will be taken out and recreational access won't be considered, period, right? We don't currently have the money for it. And so that's a pretty big question mark. But of course, any future site design has to be done after both natural resource and cultural resource reviews. And a lot of that work has happened. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So. Those are my 3 projects, Carl. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you so much. That's a good start. So since he presented some recreation type projects, does anyone else have any ideas or similar thoughts on another project or other projects out there that's in the recreation sphere?
Oh, well, Carl, I have a couple to offer, I guess, and I'm just kind of brainstorming on them. They're not particularly vetted at this point, but You know, you brought up the sea otter thing a couple different times, and I guess I don't know really where that's at in the stage of development, but it would just seem like at some point interpretive signing could be really useful. I think about the signing down around the Bandon National Wildlife Refuge with the offshore seabirds there, which is really impressive and well done. And if there's a need or an opportunity for that aspect of the otter project, that might be interesting.
Where that otter project now is I do have specifics on that to talk about later in the day, and they're in their very preliminary process of starting the basic procedure to even institute it. They're not far enough down the road, and where our money would be really helpful is just what's so valuable about it is gets them going. It's the first funding to get them down the road towards the specific goal. Then the interpretive thing and all that comes on later. But we can talk about that in specifics a little bit down the road today.
Another one I thought about, and some people in Portland will be familiar with it, but every September, the Vos Swift kind of assemble en masse over a grade school in Northwest Portland. Some thousand number of birds come there. It's become quite the public venue, if you will. There's probably anywhere from a couple hundred to 400 people there in the evening. So my thought there was, and I think Portland Audubon already does some organizing, talking, interpreting and that sort of stuff. And COVID maybe is not as possible this year, but it might also be a way to think about how do you bring more diverse community members into that kind of facility, whether it was working with an existing group to bring families or in other ways and broaden the ability of those to participate in that event, because it's an impressive event, and just as a way of generating recreation and interest, be a lot of support for something like that.
What was the name of that event, Mark?
Oh, I don't know if it actually has a name, but it's watching the Vos Swifts at the Chapman grade school in Northwest Portland.
This is Jane. It's the Chapman School Swift Watch.
And it might sound, if you haven't seen it, you almost have to see it to believe it. I mean, it's a major traffic jam with, several hundred people there between 5 and 8 p.m. and gets a lot of attention, at least in the urban area.
Are there any other that's a recreational projects? Anyone else have anything? If not, I do have, it came to my attention, there's a big process going on in the Ochocos regarding trails there, and I don't have all the details of it. I think it's part of a bigger project, but there's a lot of activity that's happening right now. This is a project's on the ground. Ochocos are close to Bend. There's a huge increase in trail use and activities, and they're trying to figure out ways to develop more trails there and also making them wildlife compatible. And I don't have the specifics to give you now, but I would like to have that on the list, that Ochoco Trails project. And I can get those specifics probably at lunch, as a matter of fact.
I think that was on the list you sent out last week, Carl.
Yeah.
Is that the same one, Davia?
Let me see, I have that list here.
I was trying to cross-reference with that other list.
I thought it was
Dang.
too.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it. Ochoco Trail Interpretation, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was on there. So Davia probably has more stuff on that. Okay, to move on, Jane, I know that you are quite connected with the Western pond turtle activities, and was wondering if you had gotten anything specific there.
Our group has not met since we last talked about this, and I need to take it to the whole group, but we've had a couple of suggestions. One is about nesting habitat for juvenile turtles. That's lacking in a lot of places as we have changed farmland and areas and so forth. And we do have some ways of making areas better for both nesting and for juvenile turtle survival. So that's one of the things we're looking at. There are also some citizen science projects where we have highly trained volunteers who are out doing turtle surveys in a lot of areas, and also looking for documenting evidence of turtle nesting. One of the first steps in protecting our turtles is knowing where they are and where they're being successful. So that's one of the things we're working for. I just wanted to say, generally, on the recreation side of it, Carl, I was very impressed with the list that was proposed that we got yesterday or the day before, that the recreation projects really did have a benefit to species, and that it seemed like for those donors who are really interested in conservation, even the conservation projects, those that had the crossover would be very, very attractive. So that's just in general. And we do have some opportunities to do that with the pond turtle project. I mentioned before that the pond turtle is being considered as a candidate for listing, which really bumps it up there as something that private landowners and agencies, a lot of different agencies, can work together and try to get those numbers going so it doesn't have to be listed. And I think that would be attractive to a lot of different people.
So Jane, do you think, like, if we were able to say, okay, we liked the Western pond turtle idea moving forward, that gives us some diversity and taxonomy, would you think that your group could come up with some specific proposals and nail those down in a relatively short term?
I am quite confident that we can do that because people have been thinking about those proposals anyway. And I think, one of the proposals we talked about was in the Portland area, but I think it's all up and down the Willamette Valley. There's a lot of things going on in Eugene and in a lot of different areas. So hopefully a proposal could incorporate some geographic diversity too.
Well, that's great, because that what it may be is if we have a whole bunch of things in one place and the turtles could happen in several places, that we would solicit a proposal wherever that we don't have a project. So that's
okay. Good.
So we could just put the Western pond turtle on there as a list on our list.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's a good start. Is there anyone else that has a specific project to any other? I'll just open it up to say, Marat, have you been thinking about this or have any projects you would like to suggest?
I have been thinking about it, and as requested, I had reached out to the Audubon Society, and they still haven't gotten back to me. I've contacted him a couple times, and he was reaching out to some of the groups that they work with in Portland, the frontline communities that we talked about earlier, and he said he was contacting them to find out how they'd like to be communicated with. So I'm still to hear back on that, but I have talked to Derek and Caldera Trout Unlimited, and they have a project that's an education project that works with inner city kids and kids at Warm Springs Reservation and others, and it's an interesting project. It's going to have to be reworked because of the COVID-19 situation to become more remote. So I was just kind of waiting to get more details today before I followed up with him, and also chatted a little bit with the Deschutes National Forest formed a nonprofit to support itself working with kids called, it was first called the Deschutes Children's Forest, and now it's called Discover Your Forest. And I've heard that they're a nonprofit. They also have lots of projects reaching out to get kids in nature. And Rika Ayotte, who's the lead on that, the director, she said it's a great place to park money. They always have tons of projects ready to go, and I haven't made contact with her specifically on projects. So I'll do some more follow-up on that. They've funded a position for 3 years to do Latino outreach in Central Oregon. So they're going to have their own coordinator that's particularly reaching out to Latino Hispanic communities in Central Oregon and trying to get more kids outside. So there might be some nice connections there for us.
I'm sorry, Marat, was that the project you mentioned about getting wood? The kids were getting woody debris in the stream. That was.
So that project is actually a big stream restoration in the spawning habitat for the only recoverable sockeye run in Oregon, which runs into Settle Lake from the Metolius and then into Link Creek. And that has been funded by OWEB. They had a complementary education piece that was going to involve the kids from Caldera, which are the underserved kids. And that's the part that did not get funded because OWEB doesn't fund education. That's the one that would have to be rethunk. And when I looked at the conservation strategy recently, I didn't see that sockeye were a species that was identified, maybe because they're too rare. There's only that one population, so I can't find that they are in there. So
yeah, it's like the sea otter. The sea otter's not in there either because it's not there. So,
and there's some benefits to beaver and other things with this project, but I just needed to do more follow-up. So
yeah, that sounded really. Another nice thing is the kind of things where, okay, OWEB, we had that great presentation from the OWEB director, and here we got something that we can fund that complements that's not in their mandate. That's the perfect kind of thing I would like to be able to say we've done. So if you could get some, I think that would be potentially a really nice project.
If today we end up with sort of something that I could hand to a partner and say, could you rework it to fill some of these criteria? Derek is very willing and eager and wants to see if he can make it work. So
I'd really look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Labhart, have you got anything you've been considering?
No, thanks for asking, Carl. No, not really. I read through the list of 17 projects, potential projects. So, they're all good. we don't have enough money, but if there's additional projects that folks have, we can add it to our list and then start through the criteria. So it's going to be a fun effort.
Yeah, I think so. I think I have a couple of things that I'm aware of and I've brought up before that I do want us to consider. The Sea Otter project, again, is just, to me, a perfect project for us to get involved in. It's timely. They're just getting the ball rolling on this. It's not gonna happen next year, but the work to make it happen is happening right now. And there's a foundation, the Alaka Foundation, that is based on the coast, has a broad representation that is interested in reintroducing sea otters. And this is all in the context, it's actually a habitat project, because the whole idea is right now there's a incredible abundance of sea urchins on the coast, and they're eating all of the kelp holdfasts, and we're losing our kelp, and that's impacting, like for instance, how does this fit into the Oregon Conservation Strategy? 17 of the species on the coast, fish species listed in the strategy, are dependent on kelp, and we're losing huge kelp beds. So it hits all the criteria. And so I just want to make sure we have that on our radar as we're talking about this portfolio. Another one, it's also on the list that was sent out that I think is a great thing for us to get involved in, is the Gilchrist Highway Crossing, where this is one of those big multi-million-dollar projects. And I might have the numbers a little bit wrong, but they need to make this overpass work. There's fencing. The overpass is done. I just drove over it the other day, but I think there's something like 11 miles of fencing needs to put in. They need to raise $1 million. multiple organizations, including Oregon Hunters Association, Mule Deer Foundation. A bunch of groups have raised something like, I think the Wildlife Foundation is involved. They've raised like $700,000. Well, $10,000 is helpful. It doesn't get us over the finish line, but my thought would be to allocate some chunk of money now and say, yes, we're into this. But then I would want to, going forward, as part of our fundraising, in a way, adopt that project and say, look, we need to raise $200,000 to get us over the finish line. So that's part of our fundraising. It's like, what are you going to spend this on? Well, one of the things we're going to do is get the deer and the coyotes and the badgers and the rabbits off of Highway 97. And we're part of our process is to get this project over the finish line because they don't have the money yet. So that we can do in the short term and maybe even consider using that. We can talk with the partners there, consider using that as a way to springboard into raising the rest of the $200,000 they need with marketing or something like that. But I think that's a really great project for us to consider getting involved in. So we're getting close to lunch. Chris Hager. Chris has his hand up.
I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Carl, and with my support of that project, not only from its marketability standpoint, but just for its ability to check off, just like the sea otters, it checks off so many species and really speaks to what we can actually do with just a little bit of fencing. And so I think it's a great project and could be really a it's a flagstone, anyway, of this committee.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for that. While we're knocking these lists up, I know of another sort of citizen community science project that I just put on the board there. Defenders of Wildlife has a really great project that's been going on Mount Hood. It started out actually looking for wolverines when there were some reports that there could be wolverines there, and they started putting out trail cams and scent stations and got volunteers, and I don't remember the number, but I think it's like in the hundreds, like 100 people, volunteers largely from the Portland area that go out and check these cameras, check the scent sites, get tracks, and come back and report that. And that information is transferred to the Forest Service, and it's been extremely useful to them because they don't have the resources to kind of find out what's going on. And in fact, if y'all remember, there was a wolf seen on Mount Hood on a trail cam, and that was one of that project's trail cams. And so I know Defenders of Wildlife is quite enthusiastic about this project and are very interested in expanding that to not just Mount Hood, or potentially expanding the Mount Hood project. So that's another one that we could get some more specifics on. It's already got a track record. They're quite successful, and they're talking about thinking about moving into other areas. In the 1 minute that's left, I'll put another one up there that I heard about through the Humane Society. We got some great responses to our surveys, and in part of that, we reached out to some not so traditional ODF and W constituencies, and one was the Humane Society, and had some wonderful conversations with them, and she's connected me with Kelly Peterson with the Humane Society's connected me with some great individuals. And one of the ones that they were quite enthusiastic about was a non-lethal agricultural wildlife control program that was instituted in Benton County, where they, through pretty low cost instituted a bunch of techniques for, so they didn't have to trap coyotes or trap gophers or do lethal means of control using electric fences, and including one point paid for a dog that lived with a group of llamas or sheep. Maybe it was sheep. It was really successful. In fact, in the pilot project, in the report, they lost, over that whole season, they lost 7 beets, that's B-E-T-S, and 1 sheep. And whereas before they were losing all kinds of stuff and to predators. And so that, and there's some thought about moving forward and expanding that into a more rural sort of an area. So, and again, that's another one I can get some more specifics on. So, all right. So it sounds like we got a great bunch of stuff to consider, and we can talk about it more this afternoon. And unless anybody has any other specific things, we can adjourn for lunch. Is there any other comments? We good with that? Are we coming back at 1:30, Sherilyn?
Yeah, 1:30, and we'll sort of get a list together of what we've been talking about, and then we can add to it if needed.
Great. Yeah, so if you guys just be thinking, and we can add to the list. We already have the list that we sent out, and maybe we can get a little more. So by the end of the day, I'd like to be able to say, okay, we're going to go approach our partners or the people we know and come up with some specifics for the, so we can maybe get some concrete proposals to start vetting. Well, great. I'm excited. That's all good. So y'all have a good lunch, and Sherilyn, you want to stick around and we'll talk a little bit?
Yeah, actually, if you give me a number, we can do it offline out of the formal meeting.
Okay. You want to call me?
Yeah, I'll call you if you.
Okay, 541 281 5885.
All right, and yes, 1:30, everyone.
Great.
Have a good lunch.
Not sure how many people are back.
I think we're waiting for Jane.
There we go. Okay. I don't think Jane is back, but everyone else appears.
She's there now.
Okay. Well, I hope you all had a great lunch. I've been chasing my chickens around the backyard, trying to get them to go back in there, roost, but they didn't do it. So, what we thought we'd do this afternoon, there was some of the projects that were on a list generated by some of the committee members and talking it over that was sent out to y'all. We didn't discuss all of those, so I thought I'd have Davia maybe just run through a few of those just to hear a little bit about them. Davia, are you able to do that? Is Davia on?
Yeah.
There I am. Just hitting the share button. Okay. So as Carl said, this list of projects was sent around, and it's kind of been an ongoing list as ideas have come up from the feedback that we got from stakeholders early on, from other partners, from staff at ODF&W, and just kind of putting those ideas together. And much of the origin is from having the Conservation Recreation Fund in place for a year and having the questions, what will it be spent on? And the idea here was, well, these are the types of things that we could fund. And so just wanted to do some brainstorming this morning with you all, and then put those in with the sort of existing list to make sure we're thinking far and wide. So I think as part of this, if these ideas trigger more ideas from you, we should document those as we go. But I'll just kind of go through it. And it's organized around the program priorities that you guys finalized in the expenditure framework the last meeting. So the first of those being habitat restoration and improving habitat connectivity. The projects we have on here are replacing tide gates on the coast. That's become a really high priority restoration approach in a really good way of forming partnership with private landowners on the coast. And if you're not familiar, tide gates are water control structures that make a lot of marginal land on the coast in tidal areas, make it more suitable for grazing, for example. Though many of those tide gates are very old, and there's ways to upgrade them that creates better fish habitat and allows for more fish passage, while at the same time providing benefits to those landowners and improving the function of the tide gates. So that's been a high priority for a lot of partners around the state, and would be a way where this fund could be used to join up with others that are working on these kind of projects.
One of the features of this particular project, just to get you guys thinking about this, in that, you know, if we were to give $10,000 to tide gate replacement, that's not going to move the needle a whole lot. But going forward, where I see this is there's a big need. There's big money involved in working on these tide gates. There's a lot of ecological benefit, a lot of good partners. And what I would like to see, our initial fundraising is kind of focused on, you know, crowdfunding and click on here and give us $10. But this is the kind of thing that, because we're able to accept restricted funds, if you all recall, we put that in there, is an entity or an individual or an entire fundraising campaign could be made around the tide gates. It's like, okay, we're going to raise $200,000 for tide gates, and that funding then would come through the OCRF fund. And again, the match thing is a question, but that's, just think about that, not so much for this round, but down the road for these big projects that we could get involved in and raise specific funding. The Gilchrist Crossing is another example. So that's it. Davia, keep going. Sorry.
Sure. Well, and the third one on here is the Gilchrist Crossing, so I won't say much more about that. We've talked about it. The second one is habitat for sage grouse. That sage grouse has been a pretty powerful umbrella species for sage ecosystems in Eastern Oregon, and greater sage grouse itself has one of its major strongholds in Eastern Oregon. And we've got a huge network of partners and organizations working on what's called the SageCon, and a partnership all about sage grouse and the habitat they need. And there are these local implementation teams that have been slowly standing up, and like hyper-local places to help implement restoration of habitat for sage grouse. And so one thing that we had thrown out there is that we could hook up with local implementation.
I think you hit your mute button.
You can't hear me anymore?
Maybe that's me.
Davia, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, sorry, that must have been on my end. Sorry.
Okay, and so the idea being that we haven't pulled out any specific projects here, but there's a lot of really great work that's been identified that could get a boost through those local implementation teams. And so the landowners in those areas would be identifying where and what would be done. The last thing I just put on here was what was mentioned this morning about connecting with OWEB about projects that they aren't able to do right now in that category. So the next program priority is science research and monitoring directly related to implementing the recommendations in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, especially through community science. So this first one is a little bit what we had talked about with Jane this morning on Western pond turtle, community science, and nesting habitat work. One that's a high priority for ODF and W is ringtails, which is a species I bet a lot of people didn't know we have here. And they are extremely secretive and nocturnal, and there's some interesting data to be collected if we could get a network of trail cameras out there just to document where the species is right now. The next one I have on here is the Oregon Connectivity Assessment and Mapping Project, which is being led by the Oregon Habitat Connectivity Consortium. And it's a big group of partners who are focused on doing the data analysis required to get a comprehensive look at current habitat in the state and where animals are moving. And so the consortium and the folks working on this project have identified over 30 species to look at existing movement data for those species and existing habitat in the state. And the eventual outcome is a map that shows what's the highest use places in the state. And that can be used for where is the next priority for road crossing structure, all the way down to updating the conservation opportunity areas within the Oregon Conservation Strategy in the future to really identify those places on the landscape that are right now the most important sources of connectivity. And the department has gotten funding through our hunting related programs to do this analysis on birds and mammals. And they have identified a suite of reptile and amphibian species to be part of this analysis. And we don't have the funding for that. So this is a gap that could be filled that would help complete that full project. The next one I have on here is studying nearshore ecosystems, marine reserves, and ocean acidification and hypoxia research. And this is sort of a broad category of understanding stressors that are happening in the nearshore ecosystem right now. I think it links really well with the sea otter one in that the sort of recent swell and the poor environmental conditions in the nearshore environment are part of the reason the kelp ecosystem is in trouble. And so this, I think, is kind of a general ocean placeholder in my mind, that there's a lot of good work we could be doing there. Number 9 is a more specific one, installing a MODIS monitoring network. MODIS towers are pretty basic radio telemetry towers that the East Coast has installed a really intense network of them. And each tower itself needs electricity and an internet connection, but then any researcher can use them to get data. And so any researcher working in Oregon would be able to deploy telemetry tags. It sounds like they're getting small enough that you could put one on a butterfly and collect information about where animals are moving through Oregon. This would be really valuable for bat data collection. And it's kind of a cool one where it's a one-time cost to get them and get them set up. And then the benefit would persist for the long term in terms of data collection by all of the universities and by any of the partners who wanted to get involved. The sea otter one we talked about this morning, and the Defenders of Wildlife trail camera one. So
hey, John, maybe before you go on to the next section, did anybody have any questions about any in that grouping? we can do it group by group. Mark Laphart?
Yeah, thanks. What does it cost for those towers for each one?
I don't have the numbers. I talked to someone about it about 6 months ago, and less than $10,000 per location, and it's pretty variable depending on where you're putting it. So if you're putting it out in the middle of a field, you're going to need a lot more to make it work. But if you're putting it on top of an existing structure that already has electricity and internet, it would be pretty affordable. So I think we could create an interesting network of them with not a huge investment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'll go to the recreation ones. Opportunities to engage and expand the number and diversity of Oregon's outdoor users. And these ones, I think we could benefit from some more thinking on a lot of these. But the first I have on here is the Backyard Bioblitz program, which is something that Portland Audubon started within the last few months in Portland. And they've had huge engagement from people every Tuesday looking around and writing down what they're seeing in their yards. It's a really cool opportunity to connect people to the wildlife in their backyard and get them thinking about that. So I'm sure there are ways we can scale that kind of thing up, keep it going for the longer term. Family day trip activities to Oregon's wildlife areas.
Daria, on the Bioblitz program, there's kind of an associated program that Audubon is doing that's the backyard habitat certification.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of fits into that. I think so. It's kind of part of that, or in the same realm. So I'd put that on the list as well. Are you familiar with that? The backyard habitat certification?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next one I had on here is the idea of Oregon's wildlife management areas, which are big tracts of land that were originally acquired for protection of particular species, sweets. They exist pretty much all around the state. And they've been traditionally used by hunters and anglers, but they are really great areas for wildlife watching. And so with the idea of interests in people getting outdoors and finding opportunities, I think this kind of jives well with what Kaylin was talking about in terms of mapping and letting people know where there are opportunities. Actually organizing opportunities on these wildlife areas is one of the things we'd probably do for pretty low cost. Summer programs for Oregon's children, opportunities to support organizations that maybe were planning to run a camp and that camp has been canceled, but maybe there's a socially distant Saturday morning kind of concept out there. So this one is a little non-specific, but a topic area that would be really relevant. And the Deschutes Children's Forest that Murat brought up this morning. Any thoughts on those ones? Other ideas?
I have an idea, and it relates to the family day trip activities.
Mm-hmm.
Richfield National Wildlife Refuge has a wonderful one-way drive-through that is just like some of the best bird watching in the Portland area. And it's not just bird watchers that do it. It's great for families too. And you don't get out of the car. So that's great in the COVID era. But we've often thought that if there was a little bit of money to do something like that in some of the other wildlife areas, like Summer Lake has something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an ODFW property, but like the Sauvie Island Wildlife Area, and I'm sure there's other areas too, where people could be, you know, they have a board where you post what you saw, and, you know, people do eBird, and it probably wouldn't be very expensive, but like on non-hunting days during the winter when the waterfowl are out, if people could just stay in their car and do a loop, that would be awesome. And I bet that Audubon and the bird community would be really happy to help figure that out for a very much money. Anyway, just an idea.
Love it. Okay. Opportunities to introduce Oregonians to wildlife-associated recreation. We had on here upgrade and advertise ODFW's wildlife viewing website. So if anyone's gone to myodfw.com, there are tabs on that page for hunting, fishing, wildlife watching, or wildlife viewing. And when you click on wildlife viewing, there's a map there, and it's a map from probably 20 years ago, and it's kind of a static map, and it has pins dropped. And you click on those pins, and it says, you know, this is a state park, this is a Forest Service trailhead, and, you know, some ideas about what you might see there. And we've actually had an intern in the last year and a half working through all of those recreation areas that Kaylin was talking about before, and cataloging what species you might see there, what's a good time of year to go, if there's benches, if there's restrooms, if there's a driving trail or places to park or places to hike, and putting that data all together, getting ready to build a new map so that you would be able to go to myodfw.com and say, I want to go bird watching within 50 miles of Portland and it's December. And it would pop up, you might want to go to Sylvie Island, or provide those recommendations. And so that the data's there and the mapping platform is not yet. And so there's an opportunity there. There could be an opportunity to merge that with what Kaylin was talking about before. Also gives you the opportunity to identify things close to home. And then we also have the Chapman School Swift Watch program on here that we talked about earlier. Thoughts? All right.
Ratio.
Yeah. So Davia, as of right now, one of the things that I do is I manage a mobile app already with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that does have that mapping capability. We already have all the GIS layers, and I suspect it would be fairly easy to overlay what ODFW has on it, so that we can. And that this is a free app. It's already multilingual. That maybe we can utilize to connect those two things together, and it would cost us nothing, but might be something to explore since the platform's already built.
Awesome.
So this is Northwest Family Vacation app.
Excellent.
So with what Mauricio just said, one of the outcomes of this, you know, a lot of these things we're going through are pretty non-specific, or there's not an actual project. It's like, this is a great idea. And hopefully what will come from this are ideas where people do get specific. Like, for instance, what Mauricio just identified. If someone said, well, gosh, I could do that. I could, you know, for $5,000, I could merge those two and save ODF and W a ton of problems. And that would be the kind of project, you know, a specific thing we would be looking for. So it's great to be going, as I'm sure you all are aware, we're not going to be able to fund but a fraction of these, but there's some great ideas that we're generating here.
I just want to say again that I really love that this last set of recreational options are very much wildlife related. I think that's great. It's not just like go to the park and have a picnic. It's like go watch wildlife. So I think those are a nice tie for funders who are, more interested in wildlife. They're not quite so people-centered because they are wildlife related. It's cool.
All right, we'll keep going. For educational materials, we have translating existing materials, which Kaylin talked about in detail this morning, an opportunity. Another one we had in here is the idea that staff time is limited, especially to do interpretive work, and that maybe there's some opportunity to engage volunteers who might, for example, here in Salem, want to spend the day at Minto Brown Park downtown and talk about Western pond turtles and have a scope, and when people walk by and say, "What are you looking at?" and talk about turtles. And same thing at parks, and I think there's all sorts of different opportunities to do that kind of work and provide information about recreation, about trails, but also about the wildlife in the area. And so I think that could be a low-cost thing where we'd have to figure out what the curriculum is for those ambassadors and recruit them. And then
Kaylin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. That one, Davia, just sparked an additional thought for me, where I know the organization Trail Keepers of Oregon, in the Columbia River Gorge in particular, is currently training up a group of trailhead ambassadors, and their focus is around responsible recreation in particular, but just as a potential partner or way to sort of scaffold off of existing training that's happening. I just wanted to bring up TKO as a potential partner. And while I have the floor, before you go to the Park Pulse thing, I just wanted to clarify that it's over 7,000, so 7,200, not 172 sites. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylin. And the Park Pulse project we talked about this morning. And that is what we have in that category. Okay. And I think this is our last category: enhancement and restoration of trails and access to waterways in a way that preserves or enhances sensitive habitat or that resolves impacts related to informal or dispersed recreation. So the Ochoco Trails project we talked about this morning. And this project, research on the impacts of recreation on reptiles and amphibians. Oregon State University recently hired a researcher who's really focused on the intersection of ecology and recreation. And so there's some opportunities there to better understand those things, because that is sometimes a source of conflict between conservation and recreation. Useful information to add to the recreation planning conversation. And then we added the post-dam removal recreation planning on the Klamath that Kaylin mentioned this morning.
Okay, so we have this list, and then we have the list that we generated this morning, which are some overlap, but also it's a completely separate list. So what I think I would like to have as a goal today is to identify at least a dozen, and we can decide how many on either side, but say a dozen specific good projects. Some would be already fleshed out and maybe even already written, and others we would go and solicit a proposal and say we're interested in this and get a specific project proposal written up. So ideally, the outcome would be within the next 2 to 4 weeks, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen fleshed out proposals, and that we would then vet those and select somewhere between 5 to 8 projects that we would then agree upon and present to the commission to fund. So that's the time frame and the outline of what I think we should be doing. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that specifically? Looks pretty good.
Hey, Carl, this is Mark. I guess the other thing, I guess I would hope we'd still, as we talk to partners or go back to people, be open to, there may yet be projects that partners think are ripe and relevant that we haven't yet identified or we don't know about. And so I guess I'm just putting it out there that maybe other things will get brought forward that we haven't yet considered as well.
Mark, thank you very much for bringing that up. That's a great point. I mean, this is an ongoing process, and that's really important that our partners know. And we had talked about this last week about outreach. Part of it is we're so uncertain of how much funding is going to come in. As we're moving forward in this, we're presumably going to be generating maybe tens of thousands of dollars more in the next month or two. And so certainly people that are listening to this or out there are going to read the minutes, that is still, certainly we're open to that, to soliciting projects going forward. So thank you, Mark. I appreciate you mentioning that. Okay, so Davia, did you happen to write up a...
Mauricio and Jane have their hands up. Sorry, Carl.
Go ahead.
Mauricio?
Jane, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. It almost seems like we could have a short list of projects, but also have some of the others kind of let people know to gear up, since we may get more money available. And if it seems like with donors, it would be really good to be able to say, hey, and we've got these other projects too. If we get more money, we can also do those. And that might be a really great excuse to generate some more money. So we may want to be a little bit more inclusive in how many projects we start getting in.
Man, I love this committee. That's a great idea. So that's a great way to use that too, as we move forward. Thank you, Jane.
Mauricio?
Thank you. So similarly to what Jane was saying, and that's definitely something that we've been thinking